We did a very interesting experiment, since you mentioned this, about this transgenerational stuff. And so there's always this idea, actually, if there would be mutation and selection, like the Darwin theory, that would sometimes be too slow. So why would evolution not develop something where you can, in a relatively short time period, respond to novel environmental challenges, but don't make it permanent, like a mutation and selection? And this is also what epigenetics in a way is. So a way to inherit acquired information. So in the most easy way, I mean, there's always this picture from Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who died poor because people were making fun of him. He's not a real scientist. But he was against Darwin. So Darwin said, the giraffe has a long neck because there was mutation and selection, and the ones with the longer neck had then more children, all this stuff that we know. And Lamarck said, no, it's actually because they have a long neck. I mean, he never really said this, but this was his idea. They would have a long neck because they were stretching the neck. So, and this would be now inherited to the next generation. And of course, epigenetics is precisely this, more from a developmental point of view initially. So people were thinking, okay, so you are born and your liver cell always gives rise to the next liver cell, right? So the liver will stay the liver, and this is because the stuff that we discussed, there's the library, which is our genome, and the liver cell just know now, because of these epigenetic modifications, which genes they would need. But now there's more and more evidence from epidemiological data in humans, and clearly in animal studies, that there can be acquired information which is inherited to the next generation. And one super fascinating example was, this was a paper published by a group called Mann with the last name in 2010 in Nature Medicine. And they did not look at anything about learning. But, epigenetics is having a transient stimulus being transmitted into a long-term adaptive change. So in a way, that's precisely what happens also with our memory in the cognitive field. But they looked at something which I found super fascinating. So they looked at liver cirrhosis. So it's a complex disease, right? And they took, in this case, an animal model. This was rats. And you can induce their liver cirrhosis also with a toxin. And then they had just two groups. So the one was the group which were injected with the toxin, and they got liver damage, and the other ones not. And then they were bred. So these were the fathers and the mothers, and they gave birth to the offspring. And again, the offspring, maybe they got the toxin, not. So in the end, you had two extreme groups. And these groups were now challenged for the first time in their life with this toxin that would do liver damage. And the one extreme group was a group where the parents and the grandparents were not exposed to this toxin. So in other words, if you want to translate it to humans, the parents and the grandparents were not heavy drinkers. They had a healthy liver or were not eating fat and sugar. And the other extreme group were grandparents now, grandchildren, where the fathers and the mothers and the grandfathers and the grandmothers were exposed to this toxin. So they had heavy liver damage. Now the question was, if you put this toxin to these grandchildren, rats, what would happen? And the very fascinating observation was that the ones with the parents and grandfathers that had liver cirrhosis were protected. So there was something that was transmitted through the generations that protected the offspring from something bad that happened to the fathers and the mothers. So that's almost like in the Bible, right? Where you always, I know this by heart, Moses 20:20, we have to suffer for the deeds of our parents until the fourth generation. It's pretty precise, to be honest, actually. We know it goes until the third generation. Yeah, and then they showed that this is actually some super complicated process that involves DNA methylation, histone modification that obviously goes to the germ cells. So you do see this in the oocytes and in the sperm, which then through development would lead to a little bit more expression of a particular transcription factor that would dampen the response of the liver cells to this toxin. So clearly, actually, an environmental stimulus that is transmitted to the next generation. So I look at this actually as a shortcut of evolution where something really bad happens, and now you have to protect your generations. But if the insulting stimulus is gone, then you also don't need this anymore. So it's not permanent, right? Like it doesn't mean that one mechanism, epigenetics, is better than Darwinian evolution. I think it just runs in parallel.
Neuroscience and beyond. Know more. Get inspired.